I want to talk more about Ottawa's latest response on Ukraine with James Bezan. He's the Conservative MP from Manitoba who was part of Canada's delegation to Ukraine in February. He's also Parliamentary Secretary to Defence Minister Rob Nicholson, and he joins me from our studio in Ottawa. Mr. Bezan, Canada has proven itself to be a strong supporter of Ukraine through this conflict. I mean, we've imposed sanctions on 9 Russian individuals, 2 banks. This morning we just saw 6 CF-18s heading out to NATO, the mission air policing in the region. What is the reason behind why Canada is taking such an active role in this conflict?
Well, Suzanne, we really see what's happening in Ukraine with this Russian aggression and the way Russia continues to try to destabilize everything that's happening in Ukraine as pivotal to the overall peace and security of not only Ukraine but the entire global context. This is going back to what we experienced back in the days of the Cold War. We don't want to see us have to turn back the clocks, and so it is important that we are taking appropriate measures in protecting our NATO allies, that we are enhancing security along NATO's eastern borders, especially in those states that used to be members of the former Soviet Union. So Romania, Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, the Czech Republic, Latvia, those are all countries that are now part of NATO and were formerly under the control of the communists in the Soviet Union. So it is something that we're concerned about. And of course, we have a very large Ukrainian community here in Canada that is very concerned about what's happening to their families back in Ukraine.
What's interesting, though, is that while we are imposing sanctions, the U.S., the EU, Ukraine has not imposed its own sanctions, for example, against Russian citizens. Do you feel that Ukraine should be doing more to stand up for itself, to rely less on the EU and on North America?
I think Ukraine's response, and I think if you talk to almost everyone else in the global context, is quite happy about how Ukraine has been handling the situation. They have been arresting those that are responsible for the agitations within Donetsk and Slovansk and Luhansk and other oblasts around eastern Ukraine. They have arrested a number of Russian nationals who have come across the border. Some of them are even special operating soldiers. So these people that come from their special ops forces are there directing these militants and creating all this hardship for the Ukrainian government. But at the same time, they are trying to implement the Geneva Accord, which we're not seeing happen from the Russian standpoint at all. And that's why we're seeing such strong language from Prime Minister Harper, from Foreign Minister John Baird, from President Obama and other G7 leaders, in that Russia has not at all been honorable in carrying out the mandate that they agreed to in Geneva just 10 days ago.
How worried are you, Mr. Bezan, that this tough talk coming from the Prime Minister, the sanctions, the CF-18s, could come back and bite us?
Well, I think what we're doing is doing very measured moves, and slowly ratcheting up the pressure on Russia. And I think we're starting to see that have an impact. We now have 3 banks from Russia that have been sanctioned. And it's having an impact on their overall credit rating as a country, that Russia's overall credit rating by a number of different agencies now has been relegated down to junk bond status. So it's going to be increasingly difficult for Russia to carry on with their provocative measures against Ukraine, their annexation and legal occupation of Crimea. And so we hope that they, as they become more and more cash-strapped, will have to roll back their military intervention along Ukraine's borders.
I was interviewing yesterday a gentleman who was a former advisor to Mr. Putin. Mr. Ilarionov joined me from the United States. He's working with a think tank there. And, he said the Russians are just laughing at these sanctions. What do you make of that?
Well, I think we're hitting them in their pocketbooks, and I think if you look at the way the Russian economy is structured, it's focused around the people right close to President Putin. They have all these kleptocrats that make up the Putin administration that are in the Kremlin, that are sitting in the Russian parliament, the Duma, and those individuals, as we continue to increase the number of them that are facing travel and economic bans, are seeing their personal wealth really erode at a rapid pace here. So it is something that is having an impact. And I don't, Putin himself may be sitting there and chuckling about this, but I think that long term we're going to find a way to resolve this peacefully. The other option is one that nobody in the world wants, which is an all-out war in Ukraine. And so as long as we can keep the pressure on Russia to stand back, allow the May 25th elections to take place, allow Ukraine to have a new permanent president elected by the people, for the people, I think that is what right now is important, and that will hopefully de-escalate the tensions that we see in the region.
Yeah, we're all watching very closely. What do you think long term? What's the benchmark for long term to find out whether, hey, this isn't working, we got to go the other route?
Well, I think long term is that Russia has to, they're the ones that are in the driver's seat here. They have to step back from the situation. They have to recall their troops. They have to sit down and negotiate with Ukraine and the rest of the world over the situation in Crimea. And they have to, one thing we haven't heard from the Russian Federation at all is any condemnation of the brutality that we're witnessing on the streets of various cities in eastern Ukraine now. They are not telling pro-Russian militants to evacuate buildings that they're currently storming and occupying. So it is now, I think, a long-term measure is to have Putin re-engage with the global community in a positive way rather than in such an aggressive manner that we're witnessing today.
I want to thank you for your time, sir. I appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defense, James Bezan, in Ottawa.